Adieu. Let's jump in as people are logging in and wrapping up for the day. First of all, thank you so much for joining. We look forward to a very action-packed, content-filled evening with one of our favorite co-hosts. Casey Heyer joins us from Four Quadrants Advisor. Casey, welcome to the show. Welcome to the program.
Happy to be here, Eric. Thanks for the invite. We got some good things to share for our audience today.
Lots on the financial front. We were just touching Bitcoin, Wall Street bets, right? plus. But of course, it's the time of year that everyone's thinking back to, really what a whirlwind 2020 was, right? And then looking forward, how do we help to look glass half full and really help to position ourselves for financial success for 2021 and beyond. So looking forward to it. Let's jump in. We are going to be recording this evening so that anybody can access it after the fact, as well as we do want to make sure it's very interactive. So it's great to see a lot of familiar faces, names through the webinar and attendees here. We do want to customize it. So twofold. Number one is there's a Q&A section. Would strongly encourage you as you go through questions about your lease, questions about financial planning, accounting, etc., to use that to your advantage and use the Q&A function. We'll handle those questions as we go. And then in addition, where you'll see a poll come up here momentarily. Please fill this out just to give us a little bit of background so we can help to customize the content based on the situation that you're in today. So for example, some of the goals of generating tonight's course, let it be with guidance, help with a specific problem or concern with the lease, or principally looking towards the financial aspects, right? What am I paying in rent today? What can I do to ensure that my financial management is in step with the growth of the practice? And then also your status and the situation. Right? Where are you at now within your career? Are you looking to buy, build, and expand? Are you looking to think of transitioning within the next 5 years? Right? Are you looking to stay put, dig in, right, and focus on marketing for growth? Right? Or are you contemplating perhaps buying a piece of real estate or buying a unit and becoming your own landlord? And then a few additional questions regarding lease and lease expiry. Right, as well as, and there'll be a couple of opportunities for this, the opportunity to request some of Casey's time as a follow-up, or I know a number of people had also requested some help to review their leases or at least a rental rate analysis as we dig through. So really appreciate everyone's time, and let's give it another second for everyone to fill that out. And we'll, again, customize some content based on this for those 4 courses. My name is Eric Book, president of Cirrus Consulting Group. I do have the, certainly the pleasure and honor of being here with Casey. We have spent a considerable amount of time making sure that the content is relevant based on where we're at here in 2021, based on where we see the current macroeconomic climate. And for many of you, especially being a dental tenant, in my opinion, there's never been a better time in our past 26-year history to be a dental tenant to help to negotiate or renegotiate the commercial office lease. Perfect. So we'll close up that poll, give it another minute for anyone else, and then jump in. So really, principally tonight is to look at one of the largest checks and investments that you'll make to a single entity. And in this case, for my section, it's the landlord through the dental office lease. And what's been really unique is that April was the busiest month in our 26-year history, as many doctors had laid off their staff. And suddenly the number one hit to overhead became tenancy expense. And most doctors had this sort of awakening moment to, hey, where is my lease? Dusting it off to try to figure out where are we at and what are our rights, what are our responsibilities, right? We're shelter in place. What impact is that going to have to our business? So since then, we've had hundreds and hundreds of doctors routine us to help deal with and help to leverage the current economic climate to help to negotiate or renegotiate the lease. And vacancies are up throughout the country, and I wanted to jump into that right now. So on that front, first section here of our 2-part section, so we'll have about 30 minutes each, as we'll touch on the lease negotiation strategies to reduce costs, so absolute tips and tricks. The best thing when I kick off some of these CE courses, number one is these 3 numbers, 85, 54, and 80. 85, 54, and 80. So a couple of components. Number one is 85% of dentists have a lease that can actually prevent them from ever being able to sell their practice through the assignment clause, through personal guarantees, right? Through lack of transferable options to renew and beyond. In addition, 54% of dentists, and I would argue now with the impact of COVID-19, 54% are overpaying in rent for their practice. And certainly last but not least, 80% of landlords structure the lease to give them the right to at least 50% of the proceeds upon eventual sale of the practice. And that's through the consideration language in the assignment clause. So yes, as that usually spurs a whole slew of Q&A at this point, but that's a major component where the landlord can deem that it's their foot traffic and their location is what's driving the value for your eventual practice sale. So for those of you, I would strongly encourage, feel free to grab a digital copy of your lease, follow along, and we'll touch on some key strategies on how to address and impact your upcoming lease negotiation from a cash flow perspective. So first off, I mentioned the macroeconomic climate. So what we're looking at now are vacancy rates versus market rents. So very interesting, right? As we have our own proprietary consistent and licensed data, what this is showing here is that obviously we had a peak here where Casey and I used to both live in California, right? We're seeing that there was a very high market rents that was up to the $65, $66 per square foot. That since has obviously come down dramatically, and we forecast it'll continue to come down based on the rise of vacancies. So that's San Francisco, right? New York, another prime example. Many of the clients we're representing there are in a very unique perspective, right? Watching a high drive an increasing amount of vacancies, right? And therefore putting some downward pressures on rent. Now, the big takeaway here is that as you look towards 2021, based on the forecasting and the analytics models we have, it shows that once we start to get immunized, we get back to work, we get back to normal, landlords start to get COVID amnesia, right? We extrapolate that that's going to come back and come back with a vengeance. So therefore, if you're contemplating or you're 2 years out or you're thinking, when's the right time to start renegotiations? What you don't want to do is look back in 2022 or 2023 and say, shoot, did I miss an opportunity to negotiate or renegotiate? Chicago, right, close to Casey here in the Midwest. Similarly, New Orleans, right, lots of extremes in terms of changes. Baltimore and other interesting examples here, right, through very consistent changes through market rates and market prices as they compare. So there's a little bit of background. I would certainly say if you're not sure what your current fair market rents are in your location, or if you're not sure about what vacancy rates are, or how many months on market in your submarket, meaning that if you were to leave your space tomorrow, how many months would it take for the landlord to fill that? And for some of you, it's over 12 months. Meaning that if you were to leave and walk down the street, first of all, the other landlord would be very happy to have you. And right, how long would it take for that landlord to fill that vacancy? So if you have any questions on that, there'll be a section to request a specific report for your practice in your market. All right, so a couple of components. We touched on the real estate markets. We want to help to determine if you are paying or overpaying in rent today. We'll also touch on some of the $100,000 traps and some of the strategies to help to remove them. We'll look at some key strategies regarding your operating costs. Very common that, a lot of doctors think, oh, well, operating costs, that's not negotiable. That's just whatever we have to pay every month, and it's equal to a third of our base rent. Incorrect. And we'll touch on some strategies over the past 26 years. For those of you that are new to Cirrus and clients or clients of for Quadrants or otherwise, we are the only healthcare tenant representation firm of our kind in North America. We've had the privilege of helping over 12,000 doctors negotiate or renegotiate their dental office leases and other leases from that perspective. So we've got a great tenure of experience across the board. From that perspective, we have the privilege of being able to ask doctors and many of the continuing education courses that we typically do in person. Casey and I were all set to do a couple of in-person ones just as COVID was ramping up. This is one of the key sections we do as we're walking around the room, which is asking, what is the lease? And typically we get the feedback, it's a contract, it's perhaps some that have been burned in the past, call it some extortion or otherwise, but in essence, it represents a check, right? And that's really what I would encourage you as a takeaway from tonight's session is to start looking at that lease differently. Look at that as a check that could be for $1 million, 1.5, or over $2 million of total financial commitment over the 10, 15 to 20 plus years that you may be in that location. So again, ask yourself, if you were about to sign a check for $1.2 million for services over the next 10 years, right? Would you not want to get the absolute best possible deal and to ensure that every penny that was possible to be negotiated was accomplished? So a check is exactly how we need to look at that lease. So again, through COVID-19, we get a lot of key questions as to why it's so important. Well, of course, as we've realized now, right, that location is your business. Your business is that location. If you can't go in, if the key doesn't work, right, what impact will that have? With COVID-19 and shelter in place, we saw a lot of situations throughout the country where obviously there's no ability to work from home. So the lease became, right, one of the top expenses, let alone now the cost to relocate and to build out, which is very costly, right? It can be upwards of $100, $150 to $200 per square foot, specifically to help ensure that you've got it properly equipped with medical grade plumbing, electrical, etc., and what responsibilities the landlord has versus yourself. And of course, as you've driven down the street today and look to your left and look to your right, you might see a lot of potential promising locations, right? And it might be, maybe it is time to finally contemplate that move, right? And prepare yourself for eventual sale and transition. But it is going to be very timely and of course, very costly. And arguably running a dental practice today is more challenging than it was 5 years and it was 5 years prior to that. And then a big component, but we're not going to touch on it too much tonight, is around the practice sale. And for those of you that may be unaware or that shared in the poll at the onset, specifically, you will be unable to sell the clinic without the landlord's prior written consent. And that's typically found right in the assignment section. So it is very important that typically 5-10 years plus prior to eventual transition, very important that your lease is reviewed in preparation for sale. And ultimately, again, it gives you leverage. And through COVID, many landlords, especially mom and pops, we've experienced lots where they've spread themselves too thin, right? They've now looked at a high degree of vacancies that they had never planned for. And banks are starting to call loans, right, and having very difficult conversations. So in my opinion, there's never been a better time to be a dental tenant with additional leverage to help negotiate or renegotiate. Okay, I'm halfway through, specifically now for cost saving strategies. So here's what we've found for the hundreds of active files we have going on right now with negotiations across the country, even with some of the largest national REITs. Is the rental rate escalations. So our team of negotiators consists of those that have been with us for 18 years, commercial real estate attorneys, and even those that used to work for the national landlords. So some of the strategies that we find that works well is because of COVID, we're able to come forth with the argument of saying, look, Mr. Landlord, times are hard. I don't know what 2021 is going to look like, let alone 2022. You might have, your production might be back up to normal or even better. However, right, from a negotiation perspective, we've been very successful in helping to fix 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, in some cases, the entire term, with basically ironing out those annual escalations. Of course, it doesn't happen every time, but we've also been able to, again, because of the uncertainty, in many cases, we've been able to get 1, 2, or 3 years fixed, right, with an adjustment within 4, 5, and 6 at a separate rate. So as you look across compounding annual, basically interest or annual increases every single year, that can add up dramatically. So even the smallest of reductions of annual increase, or again, fixing that rate or that monthly payment over multiple years, can obviously over the term, let alone the lifetime you're in that space, could potentially pay tens of thousands of dollars or more as a result. So focusing on the annual escalations, not just base rent, but of course, base rent for number two is important. That's making sure that as you go into the negotiation, don't just pick up the phone and, hey, Mr. Landlord, hey, what are you thinking about rents now? I'd really like to start negotiations early, right? If that's the case, that is it's a losing strategy, because you're asking the landlord now to anchor high, and now you're suddenly, right, you're now having to come in less. Hey, I don't think it's 30, I think it's 28. Okay, let's meet at 29. And you've just missed some massive opportunities. Another component here is your ability and options to extend. So can you renegotiate your options? Or when you exercise your option, is it only going up in one direction? That can be a major impact, because that means that the rent will always be higher. It's like you're on the world's most boring roller coaster that goes up and up and up. So the ability to negotiate and renegotiate those options, and ideally you'd want to have all your renewal negotiations complete before your option to renew deadline. Before we get to operating costs, it's a good time for those of you that have your cell phones beside you and your lease, put two of those dates in the phone. Number one is, when does your lease expire? And then also, when is your option to renew deadline? If you miss that option to renew deadline, those remaining options become null and void. So that, obviously, from a cash flow perspective, could be very devastating if the landlord suddenly, right, gave you notice to vacate and suddenly you're out at the end of that term. You might have two additional options, but if you don't send in specific notice by usually 6, 9, or 12 months in advance, those options become null and void. Operation costs we'll touch on in a second. And then also, again, from a cash flow, be cautious. Right? For those of you that were used to practicing actual wet finger dentistry pre-latex in the 80s and now are just, can't stand all the PPE and the new requirements and are just looking to get out, I get it, right? But be cautioned. It might not be as easy as just turning around and walking away. You may be required to return it to pre-dental condition. And obviously that can be $10,000 to $15,000 worth of demolition costs. So in the essence of time, I'll just stick to this at a high level, but in the lease negotiation, there's a lot of what is deemed, what in our opinion is reasonable versus unreasonable. And many of you would be shocked to find out with triple net leases, meaning base rent plus, 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 many of you may be shocked to see how much that you are responsible for and how much that you're paying for that might not even have any benefit to you. That could include any benefits or improvements to the property that have no direct benefit to you or your clinic, building repairs, or a big one now with all the vacancies are real estate commissions. If they end up paying $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to a broker to fill 3 or 4 or 5 different vacancies, to put a dock in a box or put anyone in a specific unit, then those fees, depending on how your lease is structured, could get passed on directly to you. You could be paying the commissions to be able to attract a tenant in this type of difficult market. Unrelated professional fees. Why should you be paying for legal fees for a section or a unit or someone that doesn't even impact you? Let alone interest or mortgage costs or any of the fees if now there's more vacancies and suddenly your percentage share increases, because it's not based on what your square footage is, but basically in relation to how many of the other active tenants that are in place today. And also the administration fee. If they're tacking on really more than 5%, that's definitely something that should be negotiated. Look at how much you're spending on annual CAMs. And that's just, again, just one of the dozens and dozens of things we look at as we look at the leases or negotiate on behalf of the tenant with the landlord. So another key component on the financials, to summarize, we touched on base rent, annual increase, common area maintenance we mentioned. There's a lot of others. Fixturing, for example. So for those of you that are expanding or potentially looking to relocate or do a de novo, fixturing is a period that from the time you get the keys of possession to the time that you get your business open or commencement date, that is known as the fixturing period. So we have had great success over the years negotiating that to be free of base rent. Why should you have to pay double rent while you're actually fixing up the space? So this could be 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, or up until the time that you're open. But you want to help, especially if you're opening a new space. Cash flow is king, and holding on to as much capital as you can by not having to pay as if you're in day one is a major component. Also be cautious, right? Look, we're different. We're not brokers. We don't charge the landlords any commissions, but be cautious. I've seen many letter of intents out there where a broker puts out, says we're getting 3 months of free rent, but actually they're just tacking 3 months onto the end. So now it's 123 months. So actually that's going to generate even more commissions for that broker. So just be cautious. Right? Free rent is a great opportunity that in exchange for, in some cases, renewing or for committing to a long-term lease, very reasonable to be asking for some financial concessions as you're ramping up that business in the form of free rent. Number 6, tenant improvement allowance. This is a good one because it does hit us right in the cash flow. You might think it's great, right? And in some cases it is. To get $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 per square foot from money from the landlord in exchange of building out the new clinic. However, it's not free money. And what some landlords do is will build that into the base rent. So now you're actually paying for it, but now you're paying for it every single month, which increases every year, which every time you renew the lease, it keeps going up and up and up. It's like the loan you can never pay off. So money is cheap right now. So think of tenant improvement allowance kind of like a fool's gold, right? It can be helpful, but be very cautious because again, the landlords are not in the lending business. And last but not least, landlord work. We've had a few examples here in terms of case studies where Dr. Omar Naz, for example, one of our clients that we relocated her practice, gave us a beautiful 5-star Google review. And we were able to get the landlord to cover the entire build-out cost. Of course, that doesn't happen every day, but 73 years old, she tried to sell her practice 3 times, and each time the landlord said no. So this is the section where, again, in the essence of time, is just one section within your lease, which can have, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact to your cash flow. If you notice, and as you take a minute just to read through, try to identify what some of the issues are based on these 4 or 5 components that I've shared. So take a quick moment now. Okay, so number 1 is, if you notice right in the first sentence, provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant, and if the tenant duly and has regularly paid its rent and performed its covenants of obligations under this lease and has not been in default. So 2 sections here. Number 1 is, as long as Dr. Joe Black is the tenant. However, if that goes to Dr. Jane Smith, those options are not transferable. So you might think you've got 1 year left of your initial term and 2 5-year options, but in this case for the buyer, right, there's no benefit. Also be cautious about how landlords may be very, shall we say, enterprising, that finding a loophole in the lease is quite common. And there's been numerous examples, but one notably was the doctor who was, her options to renew became null and void because they found her in material default. In the end, they took a photo of her front door and it showed her specific hours of operation. And those hours of operations were very reasonable, but she was closed on Fridays, right? And then open every second Saturdays. But due to the requirements of the minimum hour provision within the lease, she was required to be open on all days, Monday through Friday. So as a result, they used that as a reason to kick her out. And she was forced to relocate, right? All because of a major tenant wanted to come in and take over that space and pay more and give a percentage of the revenue back to the landlord. So these type of things unfortunately happen, and all the things we never thought would happen to us through 2020 obviously leaves us to be far more proactive and supportive. Lots of other issues here, as you can see, but you really want to make sure that even just one clause, a landlord can change the entire agreement when you renew, right? And here, the fourth one down, in no event shall rent be less than what it was paid on the original term. Again, on that world's most boring roller coaster. So again, for those following along, if you're curious about any of these, what impact any of these would have to your specific cash flow, strongly encourage, you can email us a copy to info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com. There'll be information at the end of the webinar to make sure that you're getting the support. Probably one of the most important takeaways to maximize your cash flow in the negotiation is the tenant lease cycle. This is what, while you were all taking CE courses, landlords were taking courses about how to generate and increase their own profits without increasing costs. And this is one of the slides, which is basically showing that the longer you wait, or the longer the landlord stalls, delays, or otherwise, right, the less leverage you have, the more profit they have, because they realize you can't relocate that late in the game. So therefore, typically now starting 2, maybe even 2.5 years prior to the expiry of the lease can give you some of the best leverage in your next negotiation. We've had the privilege of really identifying a top process. The first thing is to make sure you get all the information. If you don't have a countersigned lease, you want to make sure that you have that, because if not, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So needless to say, we want to make sure it's a right strategy designed around your long-term practice goals. You want to have all the research, you want to develop a full strategy, but that takes you all the way to number 5. What do most doctors do? Oh, shoot, I better come up to renew. I'm going to skip steps 1 through 5, and I'm just going to call my landlord. Please don't do that. Please make sure that you take all the necessary steps, process, and data in advance. So when you go in to start the negotiations, you've already thought of that carefully choreographed game of chess in advance. Lots of great, we're over now almost 200 5-star Google reviews, right? And so many locations where we've been able to cover and leverage the current economic situation and support. In appreciation of everyone's time, before I pass it on to Casey, certainly did want to, again, reflect an appreciation of everyone's time, of which we will be waiving the fee for our complimentary lease review and rental rate analysis. And therefore we'll be scheduling some time to do the analysis, rental rate reports, and you can click on yes on the exit poll as well. Perfect. Appreciate your time. It is now my privilege and honor, just in time, bang on, 6:30 on the nose, Mr. Casey Hires. Casey and I both spent some time in Southern California. He and I were both on the floor of the Yankee Dental just as COVID was starting to get interesting. But certainly we've appreciated our two organizations have worked together for years. Casey, again, as the key director of business development, has done a great job with our clients over the years to help support them, to look at their businesses differently, to help them really focus on how to get off the hamster wheel, how to really help to propel their business to new financial heights, and really looking forward to some great content this evening. Casey, welcome aboard, and over to you, sir.
Eric, thank you. I actually remember at the Yankee, while we were on the floor, there was news that the first COVID person was in the Boston airport or had passed through the Boston airport. And right. I think that was the first time I thought maybe this thing has some legs. And here we are. But great information, Eric. My goodness, if you're a practice owner and you don't have your arms around your lease, you're playing a bad game there. So that's really good. And thank you for that introduction. That's very nice. Well, to our audience, it's a pleasure to be here. We like being in person. We like feeling the room, seeing the faces, having that interaction. That's lost with webinar, but the content, the data, and the consequences of this information are still very real. In the interest of time, I'm just going to jump in. Practice owners, you're at a distinct disadvantage compared to CEOs around the country. While you're still the chief executive of your practice, you are primarily the primary producer as well. and you wear at least 5 C-level executive hats, and that's on top of producing great dentistry. Many dentists and specialists have not been trained to be business owners, and they just end up winging it. You're all high achievers, and so you think, I've done really good my whole life, I can figure this out. But this dynamic is why so many older practice owners looking to retire are not in the position that they expected to be in. Not mastering the business side of your practice and just winging it ends up costing you a lot of money. Now, a lot can mean different things to different people. So I'm going to get real specific. In many cases, a lot means at least $5 million at your retirement. So whatever you're trending for in your retirement, by winging the business and finance side of your practice as best you can, there's $5 million at least that's not getting captured. It's left on the table because while producing great dentistry and winging the business side, by not capturing it year in and year out, that's what we find as the minimum that you're not getting. So when we're talking about these topics, these aren't nickel and dime topics. These are massive decisions. Eric alluded to, what is a lease? It's a check, and it's a big check. You don't want to screw that up. And if you're talking about your practice and capturing everything that you need to capture, it's a big deal. And this may sound harsh, but most dentists that practice into their 70s, they're not doing it because they love dentistry. Now, we like to put data to back up just about everything that we do. And I'm going to share some data points from practice owners around the country that we have. And the main reason is a lot of practice owners feel like they're on an island. And I know that because they tell me that when we have offline conversations, when they're done sort of venting about their team or staff, or they're done talking about cases, and they have all to the side conversations. This is what most of you are thinking about but don't talk about. The first one is 82% of practice owners don't have a plan that connects their personal goals to their practice goals. 82%. Next slide, 94% are not saving enough to meet their retirement goals. The ADA had a survey that said 96% of your peers surveyed said they're undersaving for retirement. But that's a high number. A massive number of practice owners, they know they're not saving enough to meet their retirement goals. 85% say they have no one dental specific to talk with who understands their practice. Again, venting about staff, talking about some interesting cases, there's commonality, but the specifics of a practice and the business and financial impacts, people feel alone a little bit. 88% say their existing team cannot help them with major practice decisions. 88%. So what are some of the major practice decisions? I'll just give you a couple. Buying an expensive piece of equipment, bringing on an associate, adding a location or building a new building to have a beautiful new location. Most strategic practice direction decisions, 88% of dentists and specialists out there say their existing team, meaning their accountant, financial planner, business advisor, investment person, whoever those people are, when it comes down to it, they can't really help them with those decisions. And it really comes down to consistent and predictable cash flow. You can't produce your way to profitability if your systems and processes are broken. And in the short time we have together, I want to go through a handful of the problem areas. There are dozens and dozens of areas, but I'm going to go through a handful that dentists face that keep you on this hamster wheel, quite frankly. And I'm going to provide benchmarks to guide you and kind of give you a feel for where you're at as well. Now, how many of you have been told at some point in your career, if you want to make more, just produce more, right? If we were in person, many hands would go up if you were being honest. But the funny thing is that those practice owners who collect maybe $700,000 or $800,000 a year annually, They end up saying the same thing when they produce 1.3, 1.4. All it does is magnifies the lack of systems and processes. And sure, the numbers are bigger and you're busier, but rarely do you take a lot more home or save a lot more for retirement. If anything, you've simply found you have a special tax surprise because your accounting team didn't account for the growth that you had. And so we hear that so often. I had a great year, I grew, but yeah, I had this little $30,000, $40,000 tax surprise, kind of frustrating, right? But again, just producing your way to profitability, if the systems and processes aren't in place, it's going to be challenging. So the question is, are you maximizing the profitability of your practice? Right? That's a great question. Hopefully all of you think about that a lot. I know a lot of practice owners stay up at night thinking about that. Where can I do better? A lot of folks recognize there's an issue, but they're not sure what to do. But ask yourself, are you maximizing the profitability of your practice? And in our work with practice owners, the problem areas that we're going to go through, if they go unaddressed, they can crush your practice. They can prevent you from being the multi-millionaire in dentistry that you want to be, and they can keep you on that hamster wheel where you're doing better than most, you're doing better than your neighbors, you're doing better than some of the folks you went to dental school with, but you still feel like you're on that hamster wheel and you're wondering when it's going to pay off like you thought it would. And I know these things not because I'm some genius. I know these things because y'all tell me, right? When we have these conversations, when we present our 1 or 2 hours worth of CE face-to-face, I can tell the people that they know this in the pit of their stomach. They just don't know what to do. So for the rest of our time today, I'm going to go over some of these areas. Do a self-test. Ask yourself, how are you doing in each of these areas? Are you excelling? Are you failing? Or do you even know? And a lot of times the answer is, I'm not sure. Because again, you're busy producing as well as trying to lead and be the chief executive of your practice. But the first one is insurance adjustments, and what a topic. I mean, corporate dentistry and insurance adjustments are probably the two biggest hot topics people want to hear about. And, you know, we've seen people that produce 1.6 and collect 900,000. And some people out there may laugh at that. And that's an extreme example, but if your insurance adjustments are high, let's say you're producing 1.6, you got to have the space for 1.6 annually. You've got to have the staff, the wear and tear on you to produce that much dentistry. But if you're taking home 900 or even 1.2 of collections, who loses in that scenario? The patient's getting their dental work, the insurance company's happy, your staff's getting paid. It's you. The practice owner, you are the one who suffers. Now listen, giving free dentistry away on your terms, that's great. Absolutely. But we know a lot of these insurance companies are paying what, 55, 60 cents on the dollar. And so you've got to get real tight with your business model and you got to understand which direction you want to go. Some people want to produce a bunch of dentistry and have a quantity shop. That's okay. But the benchmark here is if your adjustments are over 15%, it's a red flag, right? This is the first indicator that there may be something that's going to keep you on a hamster wheel and prevent you from achieving more. And I know it varies state to state, city to city, region to region, right? And there's some areas that there's always variables and reasons why you've got to take different insurances, and we understand that. But just be aware of what your adjustments are, right? So if you're producing $1 million and collecting $850 from insurance adjustments, that's that 15%. That's okay. No one of these can take you down, but if you've got 20, 25, 30% adjustments or even higher, it's a red flag, and you need to have some strategy around it, and you've got to manage burnout, and you've really got to have a plan. The next slide is tax management and tax surprises. I said no one of these can take you down. If your insurance adjustments are 30% and you're getting hit with $30,000 or $40,000 tax surprises, those two things have the potential to, again, keep you on this hamster wheel. And you're going to kind of wonder, when can I get off? Maybe I need to start 2 new practices, and maybe that's the answer. We're going to do a podcast on that. What that'll do is magnify your issues for the most part. Sometimes that can propel you. It's got to be done the right way. But we define a tax surprise as, again, this is for practices that produce $1 million, $1.5 million. So if you're a $4 million practice, this number may be more. But if you're getting a refund or a tax bill at the end of the year of $10,000 or more, that's a red flag. And some people get a refund and it feels good, but who wants to give Uncle Sam an interest-free loan for a year? That cash flow can help you throughout the year. But most of the time, people just look at past year's performance and base everything on that. And that's when you get in trouble. You need to use past year's performance, your forecast, your year-to-date monthlies, and those quarterlies need to be fluid. There needs to be some fluidity to your tax management situation, and it's got to be updated. Because again, those tax surprises, they can stall you out. You have a great year and you get this tax bill and you're very frustrated. So far we've got insurance adjustments and we've got tax management. The next one, staff and hygiene and efficiencies. I get into staff compensation in a longer presentation, but for today's purposes, ask yourself, is your hygiene department producing 3 times what you pay them? Right? That's a benchmark you should know and be aware of. And again, most people feel like they have a great staff and they're irreplaceable and they've got to keep them because there's not anybody to do it. And sometimes that's true, but you need to know your benchmarks and you need to know what works for you. And that's just one benchmark that if I had to rank them, maybe not the most important, but all of them matter and all of them add up. The next one is practice account balances. Your business checking or where you put your money, that keeps people up at night. I love roller coasters, right? A roller coaster enthusiast, if you will. But if you think about 12 months of your practice account balances, and if it's a roller coaster that you're getting taken a ride for, and it causes you to lose sleep, and there's massive swings, and it's high and it's low and it's all over the place, that's a red flag. Again, it's not the end all be all, but it's a red flag that the right systems and processes are not in place and that there could be a better way. Now, what should your practice account balance be? I've got a benchmark for you. 10% of collections. So let's just say you've got $1 million practice. You should have $100,000 in your practice account at all times. It might dip down to 95 or might get up to 120, 130, but for the most part, that's a benchmark. Now, when I say that in a room, I get 2 responses. One group has maybe some profanity under their breath for me because that's a lot of money. I'm not there. That's really hard. It doesn't happen overnight, but that's part of having the right systems and processes in place. And it can happen and it should be a goal, but there's always that other group. And they've got caught with a tax surprise and a machine goes down and they say, I'm never going to get in that position again where I'm caught with my proverbial pants down. And so they hoard cash. They have 4, 5, 6 times that amount, right? Just an obscene amount of money in their practice account because it helps them sleep at night, right? Because no one's watching their back. And so it's their blanket, it's their security blanket, right? And, you know, in golf, I use my 5-wood as my security blanket. It makes me feel good, right? There's better clubs and technology, but that's what makes me feel good. Some practice owners having $600,000 in their practice account, it just helps them to sleep. Neither is good, low or that much, right? There's strategies for that money if you have the right team in place. The next one we'll touch on is, this is a funny slide, right? I don't know how much money is in my bank account. And at this point, I'm afraid to ask, right? Paycheck to paycheck living, inefficient income structuring. Y'all are dentists, they're not going to cut your water, cut your power. What I mean by this is all too often when we learn how practice owners compensate themselves, they just take what's left over at the end of the month. Sometimes they skip paychecks, but they'll make it up in a massive distribution down the road. That is an absolute red flag. That is, having that the right way is the cornerstone of helping you have the right systems and processes in place. It's not only hard on the practice owner, but it's hard on the spouse. We talked about consistency and predictability. We know people that would take an $80,000 bonus one quarter and then the next 2 quarters, there's nothing. And that's hard on everybody. It's hard on the spouse, right? What's going on here? Is everything okay? And so again, it's the predictability and the consistency that we want, and taking what's left over, having erratic pay or massive distributions, it's a red flag. And it shouldn't be that way. Every practice has a sweet spot. Every practice has this right size where they should have a set W-2 and a consistent distribution. For many of our clients, 285 is the W-2, and the distribution every month is $10,000. For that practice, that's the right fit. Yours has the right size as well. But having a set W-2 and a consistent distribution really is the cornerstone and the foundation of getting off that hamster wheel. And you need somebody to let you know what that is. The next one is lack of retirement strategies. Now, dentists and specialists incur an incredible amount of debt very early, and it's emotional, and they hate it more than most. Nobody likes debt, but I really hear passion behind practice owners talking about their debt. They just want to get that debt down. But lack of retirement strategies, a lot of times saving for retirement gets kicked down the road a little bit. And that's a red flag. You need to have a plan, you need to have a strategy, regardless of where you are in your career. And that's going to be different when you're 38 to when you're 45 to when you're 52. But you need to have that plan, and you need to save, and you need to know where you're going. Because again, those phone calls from the folks that are 60 or God forbid 70, and they've lived a great life and they've lived well, but they have not planned accordingly. They haven't captured. Those are sad phone calls. Here's a benchmark for retirement. Again, let's call it $1 million practice. If you have a $1 million collection practice, you should be saving at least $80,000 to $100,000 a year for retirement. $80,000 to $100,000 a year for retirement. That should be the expectation. That should be the benchmark. I've been challenged on that. I've been cussed at for those numbers. I've also had those same people find the team to help them do it and say, it was killing me to save $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And now, as I'm getting the systems and processes in place and have a team that can do this for me, I saved 140 and it was easier, right? A lot of times it's there. You've got to capture it. And I know that because we see it all the time. But again, $1 million practice, $100,000. And so that's the benchmark. If you're not there, what can you do to get there? The next one, this is funny. So yeah, Eric and I lived in sunny Southern California at the beach, and there was a time in our life where we really enjoyed that. This is a picture of silos, right? The Midwest farming silos. This represents a lack of a comprehensive approach. And what I mean by that is almost every practice owner that we talk to, they have an accountant, a financial planner, a business advisor, an investment person. A lot of times it's a neighbor or a friend or a relative, but they're all working in individual silos all around town. And you're the hub. You've got to tie it all together. They're not working comprehensively and universally for you. They're doing a great job as far as their vacuum and their silo and their individual thing, but they're all disconnected, working all around town. A lack of a comprehensive approach, especially for a practice owner who has a $1 million practice, $2 million practice, $4 million practice, whatever it may be out there in Zoom land. You're missing out on a ton of synergies. And when I talk about $5 million at least that you're missing out on, all of these, right, are what happened. And so having a comprehensive dental specific team, external CFO, if you will, that's what's important. So we'll hit, we'll go to the next slide and just review on this self-test. Ask yourself, how many of these do you feel good about? How many of these could you need some improvement on? How many of these are you just unsure? And again, you can be a successful dentist and you can have a $3 or $4 or $5 million retirement, and that's okay. But for those high achievers that most folks that went to dental school are and are tired of that hamster wheel, if some of these are an issue, they can be fixed, right? There's dozens of other ones that can be fixed. But as I wrap up, do that self-test, look at those and ask yourself where you're at. But here's what's at stake. Again, at least $5 million, but let's drill down. These are average results. These are average. This is not the highlight reel. This is 36-month average results for people who decide, I'm not going to settle. I'm going to be all that I can be. I'm going to get off this hamster wheel. And if somebody can help me, show me, and then let's go. So here are 36-month results. 11% decreased overhead. So everybody out there, ask what this would mean to you, right? 25% increased income. Here's a big one, 670% increased retirement savings. Think about somebody saving 20,000, and then they figure out how to save 110. Those percentages start to get real big real quick. But here's my favorite number, 1.7% of increased production. It's not necessarily about producing more. It's not about reducing your lifestyle, right? It's about finding it, capturing it, having the right systems and processes in place, getting off the hamster wheel, right? But again, for those of you out in Zoom land, you've got to be ready. You've got to be tired of the status quo to do something. And so hopefully this just tip of the iceberg got the juices flowing. Some of you might have a little funny feeling in the pit of your stomach because some of this hits home. But now's the time for action, right? And before I toss it to Eric, there'll be an opportunity for my information, but shoot me an email. Let's schedule a 20-minute introductory phone call. That's how this starts. And we'll learn about you, and we'll either prove with data that we can help you, or we will gracefully bow out. And our business model is set up to do that. But that is a very high level of the business side of dentistry, and some of the areas that can really cause angst for practice owners. Don't be the one that figures it out when you're 60, be the one that figures it out when you're younger, so that you can have your typical $5-6 million retirement plus at least 5 more. Let's get you into 8 digits, I think is the goal. But again, reach out. I'd love to chat with you. I'm going to toss it to Eric, and we got a couple minutes to spare, even if somebody wants to have a question.
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. That was fantastic. We are going to go through. We just Casey and I did a podcast recently, so we'll definitely keep things open for some additional questions. We've got all our contact information here. You're going to see a poll come up, so you can just one click to schedule that call with Casey. As everyone's filling out the polls, and certainly getting to some of these questions here. So again, encouraging everyone to use the Q&A function or the notes or the chat feature rather for any additional questions. But Casey, one of the first here, in terms of first steps, right? I'm a practice owner. I've got my practice from finally $500,000 to $750,000. 2020 was rough, but I had the best Q3 ever. I've now, I salvaged 2020 and ended up okay. But now I'm looking forward, and a lot of this did, hit home. How do I start? What's the first step? How do I start to, take the first bite out of this elephant here?
Well, it's a great question. And what 2020 did was most of the time, production, winning is a great deodorant, right? So production was hiding the lack of systems and processes. Well, 2020, all of a sudden, you're not practicing for weeks or months, and everything became a lot more real, right? Issues with lease, issues that we're talking about. And so, if you are at that 400,000 or 500,000, you do need to produce more. But then it gets to that point where you get to that plateau, right, of 750, 800, and it's okay. What's the next step, right? For our purposes, I'm never so arrogant to answer a question without knowing someone's practice, right? Having just like a cookie cutter response, I find arrogant. So, schedule a call with me. Let me learn about your practice. Folks we don't end up working with, we give a lot of free advice. But yeah, that's really the first step. But without understanding or knowing a practice, I'm real hesitant to act like I can wave my magic wand and give you the next step. But again, knowing overhead, understanding all these different benchmarks, your business model, and really what you want out of dentistry, right? We have clients that want to be fee for service and work 2.5 days a week. There's a way to be incredibly wealthy like that. There's other folks that they want to work, and they accept a bunch of insurances. And so it's very specific. To answer your question, the first step would be to schedule a call with me, and I'd love to learn more about your practice.
Perfect. Great. I see some other good questions for clients of both. We appreciate all the support and joining here as well. Obviously, these are the type of events we love to have, good conversations, etc. Other questions through here in terms of top mistakes, if you will, right? We've covered some of those within the lease, but Casey, as you've worked with hundreds of doctors over the years, what would you say are some of the, again, not to generalize, but just in on average or otherwise, where would you say some of the top mistake doctors do? Do they just keep focusing on production and sort of close their eyes to some of the personnel issues, or it's just say, hey, I can just, I can churn the butter fast enough and walk my way out? What do you see as the top sort of 2 or 3 mistakes some doctors make as they're starting to think about retirement, starting to think about an exit strategy? Is it too late? Maybe touch on some of those top mistakes.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll give 2 or 3. One of the big mistakes is people want to bring on an associate way too early. And that's probably a little earlier in the career, but again, data should drive this decision. There's clear data that we use, but many practice owners want to get an associate too early. It ends up setting them back years. They end up not having that associate after 18 to 24 months, 36 months, because it just didn't work out. That's a big one. Another one is not being where they want to financially and thinking that if they can just get another practice that it's going to fix everything. And I talked to a gentleman with 7 practices, and he started laughing because I just asked him, I said, why did you keep adding practices? Was it because you weren't making the money you wanted to and you weren't hitting the success and you just thought that scaling it would magically happen? And he laughed and he goes, yeah, I think that's the case. And while I do have a little bit more money, the headache outweighs the money because I didn't do it the right way. And so associate too early, growing or expanding and not the right way. And then unfortunately, coming to retirement, if you haven't done those things the right way, or if you're getting hit hard with lease issues, being vulnerable to corporate dentistry coming in and waving that check, and then you don't go out on your terms, right? For some people, it makes perfect sense. But for other people, they're out of options. And so they go out not on their terms and they're vulnerable to a corporate dentist sort of situation, waving the big check, and for lack of options, they go for it. And it's not their first choice.
Great. Another comment that just got posted, Dr. Erickson, thank you for being your high recommendation for both organizations. Great that you've used us both over the years as a good comprehensive approach. Another interesting component and question about income. So you mentioned, Casey, about $260,000 per year in terms of W-2 salary, and then about $10,000 per month. I might be off with the 260. But what's, as I'm now COVID, right? My spouse is reminding me now to say, hey, it's time to step back, time to, potentially hang up the coat. What's in a, again, it depends on lifestyle and otherwise, but how do I, if I'm, call it a little more risk averse, and I'm that kind of doctor that wants to keep the practice account up over $500,000, what's an ideal number? What's an ideal retirement number if I'm, let's say at 65 or 70? How do you help to have those conversations to say, when do I finally say it's time to hang up the coat, and how much do I need to have, how many zeros in the bank account before I'm ready to do that?
Yeah, that's a robust question, but I'm up for the challenge. So in the longer presentation, because I've been asked very similar questions to that, we actually break out average spend of dentists, a whole bunch of variables, how much do I need? And we put a number to it. Now, we find that number incredibly low and really unacceptable if you're a high achiever. I mean, the answer is to get your house in order early so that it's laughable, right? Some of the young clients we have, they're embarrassed at what they're on track for. They don't tell their families, certainly don't tell their friends. They're embarrassed because it's there to be captured. they made the decision to maximize their profitability. But when the practice owner is the hub of everything, that drags it all down, right? If you can find people where they're the hub and you don't have to do these things and they can back it up with data, you know, that's the answer. I mean, I don't want to give a number, but now I wish I'd have had that chart in there, because again, dentists spend a lot of money, and they should, right? They went to dental school, but personally, I mean, they spend a lot. And what they think is in retirement, they're going to reduce their spending a ton. And, you know, shocker, you don't. You're going to want to travel. You're going to want to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You're going to spoil your grandkids. And so what we do is just balance where the spend is at. And it's not about budgets, right? It's about capturing it. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of I didn't really answer it, but you know, how much do you need? It depends on how much you spend. It depends on a ton of variables. But if you get the right team in place, it's going to be taken care of for you, and you're going to have an embarrassing amount. At least you might, right? If you can capture it all. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I answered that well, but it's such a robust question that, you know, a lot of times $5 million isn't enough. And, you know, it's really not, because people have gotten accustomed to a lifestyle.
I maybe perhaps the only point I'd add to that from a leasing perspective as well is that if you're mid to late career and you're looking for that exit, and if the sale of your practice, like share sale, asset sale, you know, et cetera, if it's going to represent a significant and material component of your retirement savings strategy, then I would certainly advise you in the strongest of terms, to echo Casey's point, to start the process as early as possible. Get that house in order. The lease is a perfect example of how, you know, that pivotal point on the sale is to have the landlord and draft the assignment clause, and the ability to have the lease assigned, right, from one doctor to the other, and what impact that has. And are you liable for the practice even post-sale? A lot of things, again, in our longer presentation, is touching on continuing liability. Many doctors are unaware that part of retirement is not only about maximizing the eventual sale price, but also how to prevent yourself down the line. And again, for those of you following along on your leases, there's that continuing liability clause, which most of you in most leases post-sale will still remain continuing liable. And if you've signed it personally or given a personal guarantee, you will remain personally liable. And if you've signed a lease with your spouse or family member, then you'll remain jointly and severally liable. So from that perspective, yeah, you want to help.
I don't want to add on to that. That's why we like Cirrus so much, because if we're going to help our clients have 10, 15, 20, 25, $28 million in retirement, these are real numbers going in my head with people. We don't want that getting screwed up at the end. Like you said, with a lease that somebody goes, whoops, we didn't account for this. It's so important to insulate yourself. And so again, with protecting it, if you're going to build it, don't screw it up. And you guys do such a wonderful job of making sure that's in place.
Appreciate it. Yeah. And another point here, looking forward on negotiations. So there's a couple of things now. I mean, Casey mentioned debt. There are, you know, B of A we do a lot of work with. They have an 18-month promo that I believe is still in effect now that brings it to 0 or 1%, and the blended rate is less than 3. You know, don't quote me on it because that changes, but they've definitely have an opportunity that if you haven't looked at potentially renegotiating your debt load, then that might be a good opportunity to reach out to one of the lenders out there to be able to see if, right, it makes sense to see, hey, if I'm paying X% today, right, based on the economics and based on the Fed's not even thinking about raising rates right now, maybe it's a good opportunity to help shave some money off that in terms of the term. I've heard some examples of 30 to 40,000 from even a loan that might have been done within the last year and a half. So things to consider. The lease, obviously, as we touched on today, is another major one to think of, to say, hey, look, across my top expenditures, you know, right now I'm seeing 15, 20% of my top expenditures going towards, you know, salary expenses, et cetera. Tenancy expense, 8.32%, 8.5%. Merchandise and sundries for the dental supply merchandisers, etc. 6.5%. So, again, looking holistically across the business, seeing where your money's going. Part of what we do in our analysis is looking at those key performance indicators. If you're achieving 250,000 per chair and you've got a 4-operatory practice and you're starting to notice a lineup, right, behind each operatory of your hygienist or otherwise coming through, then that is a first indicator that maybe it makes sense to expand into the adjacent suite. Maybe it makes sense to convert that staff room that's been plumbed but not equipped yet. Maybe it's time to add that 5th op. So these are some of the key components. And also look at your percentage of tenancy expense as it relates to your total amount of collections. And again, if you're above 8.3%, then that means you've either got a production problem or a rent problem. So these are some of the key things, again, as you're looking collaboratively at on where we can help. We'll keep it open for any other additional questions. Great points of feedback and perspectives here. I see a lot of have stayed on. We appreciate your extended time this evening. Any additional questions? Perfect. Great. Well, certainly appreciate everyone's time. For the CE components, they'll be processed within the next 10 business days, and certainly appreciate the time. I see there's some hand raisers. Feel free to either through the notes or to the Q&A. All the contact details are there for us. Feel free on the exit to request any complimentary lease review. We appreciate all the support and the time. Again, we just tried to scratch the surface. The goal were not to make everyone an expert, but to be able to help educate yourself, look forward, and to help make sure that you've got yourself a great strategy for the long run. Because 2020, even if you own your own practice, very important that you've got things in place. You've got a lease in place that separates those two entities. That's obviously important from a taxation, liability, right? Value of building, value of practice. So even though you might own your own building or unit, right, a lot of this content is just as applicable. Perfect. So on that note, Mr. Hires, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated. Jared and the team for helping to support you in the background. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending this evening. Have a fantastic night.
Thanks, Eric. Be well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.